In the shadows of the Cold War, one flight vanished into mystery. At 6:26 a.m. on September 1, 1983, two missiles tore through a Boeing 747, killing 269 innocent people and nearly triggering World War III. This is the story of Korean Air Flight 007, a routine passenger flight that became one of aviation's darkest mysteries. September 1983. The world balanced on a knife's edge between nuclear superpowers. The Cold War had turned everyday international travel into a delicate dance around heavily defended borders and classified military zones. At John F. Kennedy International Airport, passengers boarded Korean Air Flight 007 without a care in the world. Families returning to Seoul, business travelers crossing the Pacific, and among them, Congressman Larry McDonald, a vocal anti-communist whose presence would later fuel conspiracy theories for decades. Captain Chun Byung-in, a veteran with over 10,000 flight hours, completed his final checks. The Boeing 747, registration HL7442, was in perfect condition. Weather was clear. Everything looked routine for what should have been a standard 13-hour flight to Seoul. As the massive jet pushed back from the gate at 12:24 a.m., none of the passengers aboard could imagine they were about to vanish into one of history's most chilling aviation mysteries. For the first several hours, everything proceeded normally. Passengers settled in for the long journey across the Pacific darkness. The crew maintained regular contact with air traffic control, following their designated route Romeo 20, which was specifically designed to keep civilian aircraft safely away from Soviet airspace. But somewhere over the vast Pacific, something went catastrophically wrong. The aircraft relied on an inertial navigation system, essentially an early GPS using gyroscopes to calculate position. The crew had to manually input precise coordinates for each waypoint along their route. One wrong digit could send an aircraft hundreds of miles off course. As dawn approached, Korean Air 007 was no longer following Romeo 20. Instead, it had begun drifting northward, mile by mile, toward the most sensitive military region on Earth. The deviation appeared subtle at first, but with each passing hour, the Boeing 747 was heading directly for Soviet nuclear installations on the Kamchatka Peninsula and Sakhalin Island. The passengers slept peacefully, trusting their experienced crew to deliver them safely home. Deep within Soviet territory, military radar operators stared at their screens in disbelief. An unidentified aircraft, a massive radar signature, was penetrating their most classified airspace. The timing couldn't have been worse. Just days earlier, the Soviets had conducted major missile tests, and Cold War tensions had reached a boiling point. Air raid sirens screamed across Dolinsk-Sokol Air Base. Soviet pilots scrambled to their Sukhoi Su-15 interceptors, engines already warming. Among them was Major Gennady Osipovich, a decorated fighter pilot about to become the center of an international crisis. In underground command bunkers, Soviet military leaders studied the radar track with growing alarm. The aircraft's path took it directly over nuclear submarine bases and intercontinental ballistic missile sites. To them, this wasn't a lost airliner, this looked exactly like an American RC-135 spy plane probing their defenses. Radio chatter crackled between ground control and the interceptor pilots. The orders were clear and chilling: target is military. Destroy the target. At 6:20 a.m. local time, Major Osipovich achieved visual contact. Through his cockpit window, he could see the massive silhouette of the Boeing 747 against the dawn sky. Its navigation lights blinked steadily as it continued on its unknowing path toward disaster. For several crucial minutes, the Soviet pilot flew alongside the airliner, attempting to force it toward a nearby airfield. He fired warning shots from his cannon, but the Korean crew continued their course. Communication was impossible: different radio frequencies, different languages, and mutual incomprehension. In the Korean Air cockpit, Captain Chun and his crew may have noticed the fighter aircraft. But in the morning light, they likely assumed it was routine military traffic, a common sight during international flights. time was running out. Major Osipovich received the order that would haunt him forever: destroy the target. At exactly 6:26 a.m., he fired 2 or-98 air-to-air missiles. The first missile struck with devastating force, tearing through the Boeing 747's fuselage. The massive airliner began its final descent toward the Sea of Japan. In those terrible moments, the crew transmitted their last words: Korean Air 007. Rapid decompression, descending to 10,000. Then silence. All 269 people aboard perished in the icy waters below. News of the attack exploded across the globe. President Ronald Reagan condemned it as a crime against humanity, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. The Soviet Union had shot down a civilian airliner carrying an American congressman. Japan launched massive search operations in their territorial waters, now a graveyard for Flight 007. South Korea mourned its lost citizens while families worldwide waited desperately for news. Television screens showed floating debris and life vests, grim evidence of the human cost of Cold War paranoia. The international community united in unprecedented condemnation. Commercial flights were cancelled, diplomatic ties severed, and the world edged closer to dangerous superpower confrontation. The 1984 Los Angeles Olympics faced potential boycotts. Global trade ties cracked under the weight of outrage. Most chilling was the realization that a simple navigation error had nearly triggered World War III. If Flight 007 had actually been a spy plane, as the Soviets believed, American military retaliation might have followed. In the immediate aftermath, Soviet officials offered no explanation. When pressed by international media, they simply denied that any foreign aircraft had been shot down in their airspace. This outright denial intensified global suspicion and rage. Days later, as evidence mounted and wreckage surfaced, the Soviet story began shifting. First, they admitted intercepting an intruder aircraft. Then they claimed justification because the plane was clearly on a spy mission. Finally, they acknowledged it might have been civilian but maintained their actions were necessary for national security. The most crucial evidence, the aircraft's black box flight recorder, vanished into Soviet secrecy. Naval vessels had secretly recovered the device from the ocean floor, but its contents were immediately classified as state secrets. For years, the international community demanded access to those recordings, knowing they might reveal the truth about Flight 007's final moments. But Moscow's silence only deepened the mystery and fueled suspicions that the truth was far more complex than a simple case of mistaken identity. Without clear answers, 3 main theories emerged. Some believed Flight 007 was indeed on a spy mission, either with or without the crew's knowledge. They pointed to the aircraft's precise path over nuclear installations and questioned how experienced pilots could make such a catastrophic navigation error. Other conspiracy theorists claimed some passengers survived and were secretly imprisoned by the Soviet Union. They cited witness reports of wreckage that didn't match expected missile damage patterns. Could the plane have made an emergency landing on a remote Soviet island? The most extreme theory suggested the entire incident was orchestrated by intelligence agencies from both superpowers, a false flag operation designed to escalate tensions for political gain. Proponents questioned Congressman McDonald's presence and wondered if his anti-communist activism made him a target. Each theory raised more questions than answers, and without the black box recordings, truth remained frustratingly elusive. Decades later, fundamental questions about Flight 007 remain unanswered. How could an experienced crew with modern navigation equipment stray so far off course without realizing their error? The deviation wasn't gradual, it was consistent and precise, almost following a predetermined path. When the Soviet Union finally released black box recordings in 1992, 9 years later, the tapes were incomplete and heavily edited. Key crew conversations were missing, and the final moments before impact remained shrouded in mystery. Intelligence documents later revealed that American spy planes were indeed operating in the area, conducting electronic surveillance of Soviet communications. Was Flight 007 used as unwitting cover for these operations? Or was its presence purely coincidental? Most troubling is the question of accountability. While the Soviet pilot has expressed regret, no one was ever held legally responsible. The incident was treated as military action rather than criminal act, leaving families without justice and the world without closure. The tragedy fundamentally changed international aviation. Within months, President Reagan announced that GPS, previously military only, would be available to civilian aircraft worldwide. This decision has since prevented countless navigation errors and saved thousands of lives. International protocols now require military forces to attempt communication before taking hostile action. Rules of engagement were rewritten to prioritize identification over immediate destruction, though critics argue these safeguards remain inadequate. The incident marked a turning point in Cold War relations. Global outrage over Flight 007 contributed to growing pressure for nuclear disarmament and helped pave the way for diplomatic breakthroughs of the late 1980s. Today, we track aircraft with unprecedented precision and communicate instantly across continents. Yet Flight 007's memory serves as a sobering reminder of how quickly misunderstanding can escalate into violence. The passengers aboard Korean Air Flight 007 were ordinary people pursuing ordinary dreams, visiting family, conducting business, returning home. They became unwitting players in a geopolitical drama that cost them their lives and changed the world forever. Their story remains one of aviation's most chilling mysteries, a testament to the human cost of the deadly games nations play in history's shadows. Perhaps the greatest mystery isn't what happened to Flight 007, but why, in our age of advanced communication, we continue living with questions that may never be answered. What do you think really happened to Flight 007? Was it a tragic navigation error, or something far more sinister? Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more unsolved aviation mysteries.